Okay, this is video 2 on the learning targets. I was so rudely interrupted in the middle of the viruses, so we'll finish talking about viruses. So we were looking at this learning target that said, I can compare and contrast the steps of the lytic and lysogenic cycles. So again, the lytic cycle, to lyse means to break open. And so what's going to happen here, the virus attaches onto the cell, it injects its DNA. The DNA says, build more viruses. So the cell doesn't know any better. It builds more viruses, as many as 10,000 viruses in one cell, and then the cell fills up and spills out. That makes us feel sick, cruddy, the more and more of our cells that are exploding, and those 10,000 viruses now can infect 10,000 other cells. They don't have that perfect of an infection rate. But anyway, so that's the lytic cycle. And then the lysogenic cycle is basically the same idea, but it is a delay in the cycle. Oops, I'm trying to switch screens here. So here's a picture of how viruses make us sick when those viruses come spewing out of a cell. That's what that's a photo of. And then the question asked for, I'm trying to get this to move. The question asked for the lysogenic cycle. So the lysogenic cycle is exactly the same, but it's the idea that sometimes viruses sort of stay asleep in our DNA. And as our cells divide, that DNA gets copied, but they don't start building the viruses until some triggering event. Sometimes that event could be stress, chemicals, lack of sleep, whatever. And then all of a sudden the virus starts replicating inside of our cells and then starts bursting out of our cells. So the takeaway, the difference between the lytic and lysogenic cycle is time. The lysogenic cycle, the virus sits dormant, sometimes for weeks, months, or years, whereas the lytic cycle happens super fast, happens right away. Okay, next, describe how viruses make us sick. Already did that. Moving on, let's see, I can explain what we know about prions so far. So let's go ahead and jump to the screen that's on prions. There we go. Prions are even smaller than viruses. In fact, they're so small that we haven't seen them yet. At least last time I checked, we haven't seen them yet. We don't have anything that's been able to find them. They're smaller than our strongest microscopes. All they are is pieces of protein. So when we talk about the size of all these things, the prions are far and away an atom would be smaller. And then the prions will be the smallest infectious particle. The next one would be the virus, which has protein and DNA. And then the next one would be a bacteria, which is a small cell. And then the last one, which is not infectious, but just our eukaryotic cells. They're enormous in comparison to these other things. They have all these organelles. Remember, mitochondria is the same size as a bacteria. So it goes human cell, biggest, bacteria, medium, virus, tiny, prions, so small we haven't even seen it. So prions we think are causing things like mad cow disease, which actually affects cows. But if humans eat the infected beef, they develop a brain disease, and I'm not going to go into the name of it or whatever, but it is 100% fatal. So prions are things that we're just learning about now, and they're teeny, 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 tiny. All right, let's see, where are we? The next one says, I can describe the life cycle of the HIV virus. So I will scoot down to that. So HIV, you need to watch the video on HIV because HIV is pretty complicated. It's super interesting. But basically, HIV docks at these specific receptors. So it recognizes certain proteins that are embedded in our cells. Remember, we talked about how some people are missing those receptors, and so they're actually immune to HIV. Kind of a crazy thing. But so they have the CD4 receptor on macrophages. The macrophages have another co-receptor, and it allows the HIV to come in. They have a form of RNA that's called reverse transcriptase. This enzyme is called reverse transcriptase, and it is super bad at copying the HIV and makes lots and lots of mutations. Eventually, the HIV starts affecting not the macrophages, but the T cells. And so when the T cells are affected, the HIV comes bursting out of those T cells. Well, the helper T cells are the generals for our immune system. And when the helper T cells aren't functioning correctly, the whole immune system shuts down. If you're finding this complicated, I want you to just go back and watch the HIV video because I'm not going to go over all the details right here because this is just a quick review. All right. So the difference between HIV and AIDS, we consider it So HIV is the virus that infects us, and then AIDS is when our immune system, when our CD4 cells, the cells that have CD4 receptors, fall below 200. It just means that we're likely to get lots and lots of infections, and that's the difference. You can be HIV infected, but it's not until your immune system is really impacted that we call it AIDS. All right, next we're going to totally switch up our lectures. I'm waiting for my computer. There we go. So the first learning target that has to do with the next one has to do with the difference between antigens and pathogens. So a pathogen is anything that causes disease, bacteria, viruses, and parasites, whereas an antigen is anything that your body identifies as foreign. So your immune system eats any foreign proteins, and that could be bacteria, viruses, what have you. All right, it says I can provide examples of non-specific immunity. So that means that it's not tailor-made to that particular virus. Your skin, your mucous membranes, your stomach acid, they protect you against all bacteria and viruses. We talked about some really specific ones. That's funny, specific, non-specific. Macrophages eat everything. Neutrophils are the ones that drop these bleach bombs and they kill everything in the area, including themselves. Natural killer cells are the ones that just poke holes in any cells that have been infected, and it doesn't matter what they've been infected with, they just poke holes, or in cancer cells also. And then we talked a little bit about the inflammatory response, which is another learning target over here. The inflammatory response is when we get a cut or something like that, and then get an infection in it. What happens is those damaged cells release a chemical called histamine. And you know that histamine from allergies. It increases blood flow to the area, which is a good thing in this case, brings in the immune cells that come up and gobble everything up. So that's a good sign. Yeah, and so then the other thing that we talked about with the non-specific defenses was the interferon and fevers. And we said that fevers are good. They stimulate your immune system to start dividing quickly, but they're bad if they get too high. So like over 108 degrees can be fatal if your body is at that over 108 degrees for too long. All right, the next section asks about the actual immune response. So the immune system is tailor-made. It's different for every disease that you get. We're just going to speak about it really generally. Basically what happens, the macrophages come along, they're the monarchs of their kingdom, they eat everything that's invading their kingdom, and then they contact their generals. The generals are the helper T cells, and remember, helper T cells are what get infected with HIV, so they don't work when somebody has HIV. So the helper T cells, their job is to notify all of the other cells what to do. So the helper T cells notify the cytotoxic T cells, which are also called TC cells, and those TC cells go and poke holes in any virus-infected cells. The helper T cells also notify, I'll go one more, also notify the B cells who are in your lymph glands multiplying. They tell the B cells to start shooting their bullets. The bullets are the antibodies. They're little Y-shaped things, and they stick on to any invaders, and then the invaders can't invade into your cells. And then the macrophages actually come along and eat them. So that's the two ways that the immune system attacks. So our next, it says, I can describe the function of antibodies in our immune system. They neutralize any invaders. They come from the B cells. The B cells shoot the bullets. Okay, and then the next section we're on, really quickly zip through, and you should have memory cells that patrol your body for the rest of your life. We have two things that we talk about with the immune system malfunctioning. Allergies is when your body releases histamine when it's not supposed to. It increases blood flow and causes somebody's nose to feel stuffy, eyes to get red and itchy. So we take antihistamines to stop some allergies. And then autoimmune diseases, remember, auto means self. So this is when the immune system attacks yourself instead of the correct invaders. I've only got 30 seconds left, everybody. I'm going to move on. So vaccines are when you get weakened forms of a disease. They inject it directly into you, and then your body makes memory cells to fight it off. And then the last thing, active and passive immunity. Active is what you get for fighting off a disease. You get memory cells, including from a vaccine. Passive is from something like breast milk, where you get the antibodies from somebody else. Ooh, I think we got through the whole thing. Oh, and just patient zero.